Hello, everyone. Welcome to Masters in Travel. This is Whitney. So, a few weeks-ish ago, we had two really fabulous DMC related conversations. And most recently, I was chatting with one of my favorite DMC owners in the industry, one of the most unique and innovative co-founders of a DMC I think I've met. And he mentioned that not only did he listen, and I said, wait, don't tell me any of your thoughts. I want to have you on the podcast to hear your side of the story. So today we will dive into that along with how to create unique experiences without breaking the bank. And to join me for this conversation is Hicham. If you haven't met Hicham before, he is the co-founder of Experience Morocco and the Travel Collection. Hicham, an official welcome to the Masters in Travel podcast.
Thank you. Thanks. Happy to be here.
So I think a lot of people, I'm going to assume that more people have heard of Experience Morocco than the Travel Collection. I don't know if that's a fair assumption.
It is a fair assumption.
But
Yeah.
let's go along with that and tell us a little bit about the Travel Collection for advisors who are not up to date on your most recent venture.
We should mention we're recording this in April 2025. So, you never know when someone's
It's true.
listening to a podcast.
It's true because every time I talk to you about the Travel Collection, it's changed or like something new is bigger, like there's news. So that's a good point.
But yeah, so my co-founder and I started Experience Morocco in 2013 now. So it's quite some time ago. And as we've grown to become one of the leading DMCs in our country of origin, which is Morocco, we kept hearing from our partners, which are travel agents, mainly in the US, some in Australia and New Zealand, and a few in Latin America, but mainly in the US, that they so enjoyed working with us that they would not mind / would actually want us to expand into other markets. And so we took that to be flattery and it just thanked them for their kindness. But eventually, enough people started telling us this. It became a chorus that we kept hearing over and over again that we wanted to put it to the test. So coming out of COVID, we launched in Italy. And a lot of people are surprised to hear that because they associate us with Morocco. But we wanted to prove that our model, the things that make us successful in Morocco, could actually scale into other markets. And so we launched there to great traction and great success. Inspired by that, we then launched into two further markets the following year, which are Spain and East Africa. And then more recently, last year, we launched into six new markets, which were Mexico, the UK, the UAE, Japan, Indonesia, and France. And so upon hearing this, a lot of travel agents are surprised because they think of us as their Morocco buddies. But yeah, indeed, over the last 3 years, we've expanded into more markets. And our customer promise, if you will, is the same ease of doing business, the same creativity, the same global approach of how to run and scale a successful DMC that has empowered us to become a market leader in Morocco is now available to advisors should they want a new alternative or a different partner to work with in the markets I just mentioned. They can try us out, and thankfully, as we started spreading the message, we've gotten a lot of folks to indeed trial or try out a relationship with us in other countries, and it's going really great. So that's the background on the travel collection and how we've got to where we are today.
So tell us a little bit the list of destinations, I'm sure from your perspective is not random, but me listening, it's not like concentrated in like a specific world region. I think that I will say from a travel advisor perspective, one key difference that I've noticed and really appreciate from your approach is that other DMCs who will say that they cover like 5 or 6 or 7 destinations, they're generally in the same world region. So, like all in South America, all in Western Europe, all in Central America, something like this. And it's not always the case, but what I often find is that it's like a headquarters and then they are in one country, but they have hotel partnerships and tour guide partnerships and transfer partnerships in a neighboring country, but they don't have like a full team, boots on the ground in every single destination that they cover. And when I've tried to plan with those, and I really need creativity and like really in-depth detail on the destinations where they're not headquartered, I can feel it's like you can feel the distance from of that location to where their headquarters are. And so when I learned about what you're doing, the travel collection, I really appreciated that you were, and correct me if I have misunderstood, I believe that you are treating each destination as its own independent business. It's
That yeah,
not Isham and his team in Morocco planning in Indonesia and Italy. It's you have an Italy team, an Italy GM, Italy designers who are Italian. You know, like it's a full, like it's a collection of individual businesses.
Yeah, we're trying to combine the best of both worlds. So effectively, having that local presence is of capital importance to us. And as you said, we'll never be selling or planning a trip to Japan, from Morocco. That's just not the ethos at all. It is also not the case that we're simply partnering and kind of white labeling with other
Right.
DMCs, right? So
Right.
what our philosophy is, let's identify. It all starts with a fantastic general manager. So let's identify someone who's from a place, a market that's of interest to us, who cares about scaling, launching and scaling a DMC in that part of the world. And to be clear, some of our GMs have industry experience. A lot of them do not. They're coming into the travel industry for the first time via this role. Let's equip them with a playbook of best practices that we've built over a decade of success in Morocco. So all of the GMs come and their journeys begin with a 2.5 month onboarding in Morocco that is essentially DMC University. Every day, they're with me and my co founder and our team in Morocco, really understanding the DNA of what we've built. So they're digging into operations, sales, understanding how the finances of our business work, and really learning what the ingredients of success are. Obviously, during that time, we also discuss how that recipe has to be adjusted locally, right? Because the rules of the game in Morocco are not the same as Italy, not the same in Japan, and so on and so forth. And then from there, we give them also a playbook about when you go back to your country, how do you go about thinking through the offering, which is something we're going to spend some time talking about today, right? How do you go about building a set of experiences, a catalog, if you will, of things that we can offer people that stand out, right? In a crowded landscape of DMCs, you have to come up with something to innovate. And so when I say a playbook combining the best of both worlds, there are best practices that are location agnostic or location independence, meaning there's a method to the madness of getting back to people fast, creating proposals in a certain way, paying commissions on time, like a lot of things that are not specifically tied to a location, but just doing business well such that travel agents want to work with you. And then there's the second piece, which is the local knowledge. So where we it's a little bit different than what you said you say it's a business in Italy, a business in Japan. That is true. However, we're giving them best in class support on things such as business development, marketing, IT. We have a super robust internal IT system that we've built from the ground up that is just miles ahead of what is standard in the industry. And these things are typically things that if you're a one country DMC, it's hard for you to afford or build to the
Right.
extent that we have because we're supporting at this point a global collection. So again, best of both worlds, a strong team in country that's doing the trip design and curation and execution, supported by a central team doing biz dev and all these other functions such that we can be world class at every level. But yeah, that's the idea.
It's amazing. I love it. Well, kudos to you and the growth so far. And every time we talk, I'm always excited to learn what new destinations have launched in like the last 30 seconds because it's changing very quickly. Amazing. Okay. So the DMC podcast, it was not one, but a two-part DMC podcast because Kate and Anna and I, along with so many other travel advisors, are so deeply passionate about working together with DMCs. And this is really like our style of trip design. And it's what we love so much, which is why we care so much about it and why we have so many thoughts. And why Kate came prepared with a list. And I'm sure that I might have mentioned this on the DMC podcast. And if I didn't, I'm sure it doesn't surprise you. I have thought many times about starting a DMC, not because I would actually do it, but because I have so many ideas of like, if I started a DMC, this is what I would do.
Yeah.
And I'm sure that that's really rich to tell someone like you. You're like, well, why don't you go do it then and stop your complaining? So I'm curious to know, as you listen to advisors, I hope you felt like you were like a fly on the wall, because that conversation that I had with Kate and Anna, that's the same conversation we would have if we were just sitting around enjoying a glass of wine together, right?
Yep.
So as a DMC partner who knows us, right? You know us as advisors, listening to this conversation, can you give us a little bit of a sense of like what were your like emotional reactions to this podcast? Was there any point that you were like yelling at your phone like, no, that's not how it works, you guys don't understand? Was there any point that you were like, oh, that's an idea I've never thought about, like maybe I should, that's an interesting perspective?
Yeah, I think again, we were chatting. Okay, full disclosure to the listeners, we were chatting before we hit record, and I felt almost this was a trick question. But no, there's one thing that I will
Joke
tell you.
question.
There's one thing I'll tell you that that I did think is perhaps it would be helpful to talk about how a DMC gets to the point where they can speak with you or target your business. And the reason I say that is because as a DMC owner, there's a bit of a chicken and an egg thing, right? So let's just do a little simulation, if you will. Hi Whitney, I just started a company literally yesterday, and I want to work with you and your clients. What's the likely answer from your perspective? Just being transparent, right? What are you going to
Yeah,
say?
come back to me when, you've got a little bit more experience and maybe when you've worked with some advisors that I know and that I can talk to, and yeah.
There you go. Right.
Yeah.
And so the eternal question is how do you get started, right? And typically the answer for most DMCs is going to be you start with friends and family with your own network. You kind of advertise that you're planning trips in, whatever your destination is, wherever you're from. And that's how you slowly but surely kind of build your book of business. And after having done that enough that you've, run through a few cycles and feel like you're comfortable pitching someone about planning a trip to your country, then begins the fun part of trying to convince advisors to work with you. And generally speaking, even if you have planned trips for your own network of friends, that's still not good enough for most advisors. So it'll take a long time for you to build relationships where someone is going to be willing to take a chance on you. And so the reason I bring up all this is to say the missing piece from the podcast, or the thing that I think advisors don't really think through, is how do you fit, you as an individual advisor, and then bigger picture, how does your agency fit into the book of business of a travel agency, of a DMC, sorry, right? So and so there's a couple of components that go into that. So one is geographically, is the DMC you're partnering with focus primarily on your market? A lot of DMCs around the world consider the American market to be the holy grail. Like that's a market that a lot of them want to work within, but it's also one of the hardest ones to break into, right? So imagine that you broke into a different market first because it was easier. You want to build the muscle of working with the US markets, but you also don't want to let go of the market that it first enabled your success, right? So when an advisor reaches out to a DMC, they're often just thinking about the relationship between them and the DMC, or more specifically, the person at the DMC that they're dealing with. But it's helpful to get bigger context of like how your book of business falls within the book of business. Is the DMC you're dealing with trying to grow their presence in the US? Are they trying to shift away from the US business? Are they trying to grow within your agency particularly? Or do they want to diversify away from your agency? All of these things, from our perspective as DMCs, will impact the way we are prioritizing, to be candid, your particular inquiry. And oftentimes I feel like travel advisors don't even think to it's a question they don't even ask themselves, like how do I fit within the goals of this particular DMC? And the reason I'm bringing this up is understanding that will make the overall process of working with the DMC easier, right? So if you understand that, for example, no one in your particular agency or host agency has worked with this DMC, and you can position yourself as saying, if you do a good job with me here, if we can execute well on this booking, I will make it my mission to kind of be an ambassador for you within my host agency. And I know that you don't have any because I asked around and no one's worked with you before. You just gave the DMC a lot of good reasons to prioritize your booking and really give you the best possible service. On the other hand, and again, I'm just being candid for the sake of our listeners, if everyone in your host agency or your friends is working with the DMC already, that gives you that gives you two pieces of information, one positive and one less so. The positive piece is clearly they're doing something right if they have a lot of referrals, but also they can kind of rest on their laurels, right? So also you're probably not going to get the most expeditious service, the most creativity if it's an agency that already feels like they've gotten in with your agency or simply with your pool of friends or whatever the case may be. You can also play a geographic angle that a lot of advisors don't tend to think through, which is to say, I'm just going to pick on Albuquerque because it's the first city that came to my mind, but maybe there, and in fact not maybe, I know for a fact there's a nice little community of travel agents, of luxury leisure travel agents in Albuquerque. But the truth is, when suppliers come to the US, they're typically focusing on the large metros, your Atlantas, your Dallas, Houston, LA, San
Yes.
Francisco, etc. And so there the value proposition could be, again, similar to what I said earlier, like, hey, there's a nice like group of us here in Albuquerque that don't know anything about you. If this goes well, I can organize a webinar, for like there's maybe 8 or 10 of us, and we'll join in, and I can share my experience working with you, and it'll give you, an in this community where, because partners typically don't come and visit with us, if you invest in building relationships with these people, they'll be loyal to you, right? So the common point here is understanding how you fit within a DMC's book of business and understanding how you can do things above and beyond the current inquiry you're working on to strengthen the bond with the DMC and make sure they're giving you their best efforts, right? And so that's the only thing I feel like I was missing from that conversation is sharing a bit of the background from our side of like how we think through. Okay, I just got 10 inquiries today. Who am I going to give each inquiry to, and how are we going to prioritize these inquiries? And from a travel advisor perspective, I think you guys would think, oh, it's based on budget. Yes and no. Like budget, yeah, certainly it's a consideration. If at the same time I get an inquiry for $100,000 and for $5,000, obviously those inquiries don't carry the same weight. But that's not all of it, right? Again, if the 5K booking comes from an agency that I've been meaning to break into and I haven't been able to break into, or from an advisor that I've heard great things about, and I know they're giving me a small piece of business to get started, but they have a much bigger piece of business I can get later, I might prioritize that. So oftentimes when we focus about the brief, the client's brief, we just focus on the individual trip. So Whitney, you're going to reach out, you're going to say, this is for the Smith family. They're coming to Morocco for 5 days, and this is roughly their budget, whatever. You're not going to tell me, by the way, like, I heard about you through these people and like giving me that context. You're not going to tell me, I don't think you have a lot of business from my agency, but I'd love to see if we can, build that book of business for you. And giving me this information as part of the initial brief will give me an incentive or a further reason to prioritize your inquiry. So that's, sorry, it's a very long answer to a short question, but that's a piece of it that I thought was missing from the conversation.
Yeah, no, I'm really glad that you've shared this because now in my mind, I'm kind of like, well, wait, not that I want to push back, but that I also feel like it kind of brings up like a different perspective of this conversation. Um, I don't want to forget, can you tell us a little bit about what it means to work with different like areas of the world? Like the United States is the holy grail, but all of your business is not coming from American travel advisors. You have business coming from other parts of the world. So as a DMC co-founder and owner and business person, what does that mean for you? Is it a different client profile that you kind of have to cater, like design their trips a little bit differently? Is it just a different budget because of exchange rates? Like what does it actually mean when you see, like, what are the major regions and how do you shift your offering based on
Yeah.
regions?
Yeah, no, great question. And again, I think as you get to know a DMC, one of the questions that you as a travel advisor should ask, and that very few travel advisors ask, is where does your book of business come from? Right. And that's a fair question to ask. And even if the answer is like 90% from outside the US, but we really want to invest in the US market, it's good for you to know because that gives you leverage, right? That means that you as a travel advisor can bring them more business by telling your friends and you know that they want to break into the US. So to answer your question more directly, I can answer for us as a travel collection, and then I can give you an answer that's just general across
Mm-hmm.
DMCs. For us as travel collection, our primary market is and has always been and will always be the US because that's the market we understand the best. Simply said, my co-founder and I spent about 10 years living in the US before we started the experience in Morocco, and we just feel like we understood the US market, the US mindset, the needs and wants and expectations of a US traveler better than most DMCs around the world because we lived and breathed it ourselves. The best example I can give you of this, I always think about the face of this gentleman and how proud I was that I kind of cracked the code, right? Which was a multi-gen family. The kind of the mom was planning this trip, but it was her and her children, her adult children, and then her parents. And so, long story short, her father was kind of roped into this trip to Morocco, pretty much against his will. Like you could really tell he was just there because his daughter said to show up at the airport. And long story short, they were spending the night in the Sahara Desert, which is something a lot of people do in Morocco. Glamping, luxury camp, taken over, privatized just for them and whatnot. And it happened to be the first weekend of February or the second. But anyways, you'll get my point, which is the day of the big game. And he didn't communicate this to anyone, but I could kind of tell from the grumpiness around being in Morocco at that time that he felt he was missing an important moment in his life. And again, what we did there was we set up a Super Bowl watch party in the Sahara Desert. The moment the lights came on and he was able to watch the game in the Sahara Desert, like this man was transformed into like, you guys are the best, Morocco is the best, like yes. But someone who wasn't sensible or sensitive to US culture and in tune with what milestones are important in the calendar year in the
Yeah.
US would have skipped that altogether. So
Yes.
okay,
Yes.
for us, American market is the main market. The other markets we deal with are Australia, New Zealand, and there, slight variations. Typically longer stays. Australians, when they go somewhere,
Yep.
they stay for longer, and slightly lower budgets versus the US. And then we also have a book of business from several Latin American countries, and those I would say again, budget wise, I'm stereotyping here, but a little bit more constrained than American travelers. And also, and these are cultural nuances. They tip far less, right? And so that's an important thing for us as DMCs to keep in mind, because when you deal with a tour guide who is excellent with an American traveler, part of that excellence comes from the fact that they know they're going to be tipped generously at the end of their tour. And so it ends up being a challenge when you want to diversify, or if you want to diversify away from the US. You introduce, for example, clients from another part of the world where tipping is not customary, or certainly not to the same extent that it is in the US. You have to also deal with your ecosystem of partners, transportation providers, tour guides, even the porters at hotels who love working with you because of your mainly American clients may be less willing and ready and you know just providing the same level of service to people from other parts of the world. So that's our experience. Another market that has its very own traits and specificities is the Chinese market. We have a very limited experience dealing with that market, but I know from our limited experience that the needs and wants of a Chinese traveler are very different, particularly
Yeah.
when it comes to food, for example. Like
Yeah.
typically they're more comfortable eating their own cuisine than they are eating cuisine of the parts of the world that they're
Hmm.
traveling to. So it's
Hmm.
interesting. In Morocco now, there's a whole ecosystem of Chinese restaurants that are only catering to Chinese tourists, meaning
Hmm.
they're not open to, I mean, theoretically you could walk in as a Moroccan, but like they only speak Mandarin. They're there to cater to Chinese tourists and not to Moroccans, and that's
And
because
there's
of the
enough
habits.
volume for them to just run their business on Chinese
Yes,
tourists. That's
yeah,
incredible.
yeah.
That's incredible.
Uh, so
Okay.
that those are a few examples.
Yeah. Okay. So I got to remember back to what you were describing. So I think from a travel advisor's perspective, it's interesting to think about how you think of us within our ecosystem. So within our host agency, within our consortia, within the city that we live in, like you are kind of looking at us as like a whole package. Like it's more than just I'm Whitney. My business is Undiscovered Sunsets, and the client I'm working with today is Kimberly and Brian. You know what I mean? Like
Yeah,
there's so much more that you're kind of taking into account. And that's not something that I've ever necessarily thought about. And even when I'm thinking about it now, I'm like, oh, that matters. Like, not that I'm surprised that it matters, but I don't feel so influential in my city, my host agency, or my consortia. Like, I'm almost a little bit like, oh, I don't know that I could come to you and say, if you do well, I will help to spread the news in my host agency. But the reality is that we do, because without it being like a big sales pitch, we do. If somebody
yeah,
asks me who I work with in a specific
yeah,
destination, I will tell them. And if the experience has been overwhelmingly positive, I will go to many links to express that. And I will also
yeah,
go to many links to express the opposite of like, I
yeah,
did and I tried, and this was my experience and this was my frustration. And that is happening on a daily basis in our host agencies, and also not just host agencies, but like amongst, our
yes,
little friend groups and fams. And
yeah,
you know that. So I think that when we consider an individual inquiry, the reality is that we are not just travel advisors, but we are small business owners. And most of us are working alone. And we are drowning from day one. Like day one, you start as a travel advisor, you're making no money and you're drowning. And it sounds crazy. And I'm sure that your experience starting a business and starting a DMC was similar. But I think that I'm going to go out on a limb and assume on behalf of most of us that we don't go to great lengths to share like the bigger picture of ourselves and our business in addition to the inquiry, because I don't know that we realize how impactful that is. And also, it's like a time thing of like the email that I send your team for a client inquiry is already a million miles long. And then if I add all this other stuff of like, here's who I am in the industry, and if you do well, I'll take it back to my host agency. It's like we could have had an hour long call by this point, right? And so I think that as I was listening to you describe this whole situation, it just kind of started making me think if this needs to happen over email, it absolutely can. But this just reiterates the importance of meeting people in person
yes,
and going to conferences, going to trade shows, or if you come to Des Moines, which I will
yeah,
badger you until you do.
yes.
Um, More people have been coming recently. I feel like people are hearing my complaints. um, that if somebody comes to your city, like go meet them, start that conversation, get to know them and let them get to know you in that moment. Because then when you send that email, it's far more impactful to share all of this information in person than to share it over an email, right? And then that new inquiry that you bring, it kind of gets not necessarily put to the top of the pile, but you've already gone through all of those formalities. So you immediately like know who that person is and whether how to prioritize them, I
Yeah,
guess.
no, 100%. I would add one thing though, which is if you are unable to meet in person, I would wager that the single best way to start working on an inquiry, especially a first inquiry with a DMC, is to just say, hey, I've heard about your company. I'd love a chance to work together. When can we hop on a call? And that is the single best way to start a relationship. To be clear, you don't have to hop on a call for every inquiry, but the first time,
The
yeah.
first,
And if a DMC is not willing to invest that time in you, that's a big, big red flag. Big red flag. For us, it's often kind of the frustration is the other way around, which is like we love nothing more than to do a call, and it could be, to be clear, I'm not. It doesn't have to be an hour. It could be 20 minutes, but just
yeah,
let's understand who you are. Give us a bit of background about your book of business and who your clients are, and we'll have some just initial back and forth about what's possible for this particular inquiry. That, let's say, 20-minute conversation can save us all like 15 emails and just get the collaboration started on the right note to begin with. So yes, meeting in person at a trade show or road show is always amazing. That's top option. But second to that is just open up, instead of sending us the super long email brief. If you've got it, sure, but like send us a quick email. Hi, I've heard about you guys. I'd love to hop on a call to better understand how you work and how we can work together, and I'll tell you about the inquiry along the way. And again, if you do that and you don't hear back within one business day, or you just say, can you send us a brief about your clients, and they just want to do email, big red flag. Any DMC worth its salt should be willing
yeah,
to invest time in getting to know you.
yeah. No, I think that that's a really, really good point because I'm always most frustrated working with a new DMC for the first time. And I also will admit that I'm not good about getting on a call to just kind of like help just get to know each other.
Yeah,
But once I work with a DMC like a few times and it's like, okay, you know how I work, I know how you work, then you kind of get like then you get in motion.
yeah,
And I this is not dissimilar to how we work with our clients. When
right.
someone sends me a random email that's like, hey, blah, 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 can you send me prices? I'm like, whoa, whoa, whoa.
Yeah, yeah,
Here's my link for a call. If you won't get on a call with me, I'm not working on this. So it's not dissimilar. I think that travel advisors are unique in that, well, we're not unique. We're similar to you, but on a different end of the spectrum. We're in between clients and DMCs, and you are in between advisors and providers,
yeah,
right? And so we have this certain relationship that we really spend a lot of time and energy on with clients, but we don't turn that around and do the same for DMCs. And I think that that is not great. I think that we can improve in that a lot because you have to do both. You have to develop the relationship with us and with your providers. And if you don't have a close relationship with both, it doesn't work. And we're kind of trying to get away with a really great relationship with clients and like kind of being lazy on the DMC side. So
yeah,
I'm saying this for myself as much for anyone listening that both are really important and both are really a part of building a really solid like business from a business development perspective, like a really solid foundation. Um, this question was not planned, but now that we're here, I have to ask you.
hmm
So I'm sorry to put you on the spot. Can you talk to me about what happens in behind the scenes in a DMC's office when an inquiry comes in and they say the client's budget is X? And let's just say that it's $15,000 for a 10-day trip.
yeah,
What's happening behind the scenes to help the travel designers decide what to include and what budget to actually send? Because the number of DMCs who actually respect the number that I share up front is
yeah,
small. And I'm always getting like overinflated budgets of like, you said 15, but here's 25. And then I'm like,
yeah,
or you didn't say anything. So here's a $30,000 budget when it's like, oh God, I didn't say anything, but I was probably thinking 10.
yeah.
So like, can you talk to me a little bit? I feel like you're going to be able to shed some light on like the disconnect here because it's a big frustration point with DMCs in general, like that I just
Yeah.
don't understand what's happening.
Yeah. So I think first thing to recognize here is that what the scenario you just laid out is not the worst case scenario. The worst case scenario is no communication about budget whatsoever. Because in the example you just gave us, you talked about here's 15K, what can you do, right? But you'd be surprised how often we get a request that just says, they want comfortable accommodations. They have 5 nights, and it's like, well, what, like your definition of comfortable and my definition of
Yeah.
comfortable could be two very different things. And oftentimes the question that we kind of have to ask and you kind of have to answer is, if they don't have a budget for the trip, you need to give us an indication of the hotel spend. That generally we can
Yes.
extrapolate from that, what the overall trip budget would be as an acceptable thing. But if you're not
Yes.
even willing to give us that, it's really hard for us to work around anything, right? Because again, some people's definition of a 5-star hotel is like $500 a night. Others
Yes.
know that it's like 2,000. So
Yes.
at the very
Yes.
least, if you're not going to give us an entire trip budget, please give us the estimated per DM spend on a hotel room that they feel would be comfortable, and we can kind of extrapolate from there what an overall
Yes.
budget would be. Now, to answer your specific question, there's kind of, I would say, three approaches, and it depends on what DMC you're dealing with and kind of people will do. Some, which I would say is probably like, so less than 10% of DMCs are going to come back to you with something that's like $14,300. So less than the intended budget you gave us. That's
It
probably
happens
10%.
sometimes, for the
Yeah.
record. It
Yeah.
does
Yeah.
happen sometimes.
Yeah.
Are you saying that they won't because it's not possible, or they won't because just like as a business practice,
As a
you're going to
business
try to
practice.
push the envelope a little
Yeah,
bit?
exactly. Then you've got a good, 40% that's going to do, go way over. So you're giving us 15, we're going to come back to you with something that's like north of 20. And that's unfortunate because that's just not a best practice. And then the rest are going to be somewhere in the ballpark, but usually a little bit above. So you're giving us 20, 15, we're going to come back to you with something between 17 and 19. And the idea being, let's show your clients what's a little bit better than what they think they're going to spend, but what they would get if they were willing to spend a little bit more, and we can always claw it back, right? And the logic, again, full transparency, is they're probably not aware of what they can do if they stretch a little bit, and let's show them. And if if it's not possible, we can always work backwards. Whereas I can also tell you from experience, when you do the kind of A+ on the assignment and you come back with like $14,900, which is right under the budget you gave us, what can bite you in the behind is, oh, like, but our friends, we met people and they did this and that, and you never told us that we could do it. And it's like, well, yeah, we never told you because we were told your budget was X, right? And so part of what's going on from our perspective, let's just illustrate the scope of what's possible, and then we can always claw it back, as need be. But I would say the best practice, and this is more for any DMCs out there listening than for travel advisors, is give you something. Again, in the example of 15, I would say best practice would be come back to you with a proposal right around 15.5, 16, and say, and as available upgrades, this is what they could do.
Yes. Yes.
That's the best practice.
This is what I always prefer, and this is what I always ask for. And like, thank you for saying that for any DMC listening, whether you offer a breakdown or you don't, because this is different per DMC. If you can respect the budget that was originally asked, like show us what can be done with that budget, and then show us hotel upgrades, experience upgrades. So I still want to know what's possible from a DMC
Yeah.
and what's possible in that destination.
Yeah.
But the conversation with clients, going back to them and saying, here's what you asked for, here's what's possible. How do you want to modify? How do you want to bring this together? 9.9 times out of 10, they spend more than they originally thought they
Yeah.
would.
Yeah.
But when we don't have that break apart of like, here's 15 plus upgrades and it's just 25,
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
clients shut down,
Yeah.
and then it causes a problem for us. And this
Uh-huh.
is really something that I understand, and I try to communicate to DMCs up front, of always saying, I want to see 15 and I want to see upgrades. And sometimes, especially with honeymooners, 15 is 15 is 15, and it is not flexible. So
Yeah.
I cannot show them what's possible. And
Yeah.
I also, but it just feels like lost in translation, or sometimes there's a conversation going on in the DMC office that I'm not a part of. And so like the way that it's decided on like how to handle, um, it's really frustrating sometimes when I'm sharing that budget up front and then it's not really respected. And then I'm kind of put in a situation of, well, now 4 days have been wasted
Yeah.
and this isn't going to work.
Yeah.
And so I don't know what the solution is now. I'm just kind of sharing my grievances.
No, no. I think the solution is to call it out explicitly in your, in your 15 paragraph email. Just add one sentence that says, their target budget is 15K. Please do your best to respect this budget, and indicate if there are optional extensions or upgrades that are available that could take the budget up by an additional 3 to 5K. I'd be happy to look at those, but
Yeah.
please make sure to respect the 15K in your initial budget. If you just spell that out explicitly, underlined, I think it might increase the odds of you getting back what you're hoping to get back.
And I think to your point, if they don't respect that, even after I've
Yeah.
explicitly said that, then like that's a red flag.
Yeah.
It's yeah.
100%.
Okay, we need to get to the very exciting conversation about unique experiences and creating unique experiences that don't break the bank. So, before we talk about specific experiences, just share with me a little bit of your philosophy on this and why you feel it's important to distinguish unique experiences versus unique experiences that don't break the bank.
Yeah, because I think there's been these two have been amalgamated, right? And then now it's like it's a combo, right? You can't have one without having the other. And so in an industry where everyone loves to talk about bespoke luxury, tailor-made,
Yes.
personalized, whatever, all of a sudden anything that that goes out of the typical guided visits is assumed to be horribly expensive. And I am on a bit of a mission to change that within the industry. And to be clear, there will always be room for people who want to have a private visit with the Pope, or want to see the Mona Lisa with no one else around. But that's these are, I feel like these are the stories we all talk about, but they represent like 1% or even less than that of
Exactly.
like
Yes,
available
the
clients, right?
people. Yeah,
Right.
exactly, exactly.
Um,
I think
and
it's good from a travel advisor perspective. I'm always happy to know, like, okay, if and when I have a client that is truly requesting that, I know which DMC to go to because I know who can execute it and who can do it at the utmost quality.
yeah,
For the rest of my clients,
right.
what else can we offer them?
Right. And so that's where I feel like, and again, let's just be transparent here. I think we often look down and kind of poo-poo these online marketplaces such as Airbnb experiences or Viator, Get Your Guide, right? Because it's cutting us, all of us, out of the equation, whether it's a DMC or a travel agent. However, I do think we need to recognize one positive thing, which is these platforms have, first of all, they've enabled millions of people around the world to start interacting with tourists on a direct basis, which is good for the global hospitality economy.
Yes.
But two, I think one point has been made abundantly clear, especially if you look at some of the more innovative experiences that are out there. You can do some really cool stuff for not a lot of money, right? If you just
Yes.
type into Get Your Guide or Viator or whatever, like any city around the world, you're going to see the expected
Yeah.
walking tour, schedule tour, whatever. But you'll also find some individuals offering some cool things, right? And so
Yes.
my message for our DMCs, for our general managers and our sales teams that are curating trips is, if these guys can do it, there's absolutely no reason for us not to be able to think through. The idea is not to encourage people to go to way off the beaten path destinations, because that's, in most cases, that's a losing battle, right? It's like
Yeah.
if you're coming to France for the first time, I could spend, you know, 10 hours talking to you to convince you not to go to Paris, but it's like you probably want to see Paris, like it's your first time in France, right? However, what we can do is help you see Paris through a different lens, like think through things that are not, again, not going to break the bank, but that are original and different. And in a typical itinerary, again, we need to distinguish between what people say they want and what they really want. What they everyone says they want, as off the beaten path, as atypical as possible. But then we have to face the reality that they also want to get their bearings, right? So if you're coming to Paris, you want to just understand the history of Paris and the history
Mm.
of the Louvre and the history of this and that. So
Have
the
a
idea is
photo
not
with the
to,
Eiffel Tower.
yeah. So the idea is not to make everything off the beaten path, but it's to introduce, as part of your 3 days in Paris, like here's a couple of things that most people don't do that are just a little kooky. And again, don't necessarily. And so when I mean, let's put some numbers on this, so we're not being ambiguous. When I say they don't break the bank, I'm talking about experiences that are going to range between 100 and like 300, $400 a person. So it's not nothing, but it's not
Yeah,
like impossible
exactly.
amounts of money, right?
Exactly,
Um,
exactly. And
and
I think
so
that
yeah,
for a couple, for a half day experience, anything under $1,000 is reasonable because just a guided walking tour with no
right.
transportation is going to be $700 to $800 average, kind of depending upon where you're at. So if you come to me and you've got like, well, along the same kind of budget lines, anything that's between $400 and $800 for a half day, I will take that all day long.
Yeah.
So,
And
so
and so yeah, go
so
ahead.
talk to me about like how you conceptualize and like come up with ideas and experiment with, what you think people might be interested in.
Yeah, it starts with people. I started earlier, we were talking about our growth, and I said for new markets, the starting point is finding an amazing general manager. Well, once you found that general manager in a given market, we spend a lot of time thinking through their personal network, which might sound surprising, but like that's honestly where a lot of our most unique experiences now around the world have come from. It's, who do you know? Who are your friends, your buddies? They could be entrepreneurs, they could be lawyers, doctors, startuppers, they could work at an accounting firm for all I care, but who are the people who can shed some light on your part of the world in a way that is not the same perspective as a tour guide. And again, just one more time to be clear, you're going to get the tour guide, right? This is in addition to, right? It's not a replacement of. And
Yep.
so let me give you some examples because this might sound a little vague. So in Italy, if I tell you to think about Sicily and experiences that come to mind, you're going to tell me about a lot of things. You're probably not going to talk about spirits or gin, right? If I ask you to think about gin or spirits, you might
Mm.
talk about Tokyo or the UK, London perhaps, or Ireland or Scotland, but you're definitely not going to think about Sicily. And yet, our GM in Italy, his name is Alberto. One of his closest friends, he's Sicilian originally, Alberto. One of his closest friends is a Sicilian gin entrepreneur. Now, this entrepreneur manufactures or makes gin for export, and at no point in his vision in building his business was part of it being a touristic or hospitality experience. But we once had a request from a travel agent who had just happened to say that her clients love spirits, and it was important to her that in every hotel they were staying, there was a wide selection of spirits they could pick from for their nightcap. And so Alberto thought, well, what, like, would they want to meet someone who's actually making gin in Sicily? And they said yes. And so he talked to his buddy. He's like, would you be open to like opening up your, your manufacturer, where your distillery, and having people come and sample and learn your story? And it was such an amazing experience that now this is something that we offer to a lot of our clients. And indeed, it's something that our clients love to do when they're in Sicily. Why? Less so about the gin. I mean, I don't drink, so I can tell you if I cannot say if the gin is great or not, but by all accounts it is. But it's less about the gin. It's more about they're meeting an Italian entrepreneur who's walking them through his journey as an entrepreneur, the highs and lows, and his day to day of running a business in Sicily that makes gin. And that's a fascinating look at a culture, at a place through the lens of someone who's from there, who's living there. That's not a tour guide, right? Switching gears completely, but there's a common theme here, which is again personal connections. In the UK, I recently did this, and so I can speak to it firsthand. A friend of our GM, whose name is Karen. Karen is our GM. A friend of hers is a former BBC journalist who used to read the nightcast on the BBC, and after doing that for many years, he stepped away and moved into fictional writing. So he's now a best-selling author in the UK, and all of his books take place in the Victorian era. And so he has a tour of London that he does, where you are in the old city of London, and he is very gifted at storytelling. So as you're walking through these streets in the old city center of London, he's really transporting you back to how these streets were in the 1400s, and you're visualizing how densely packed they were, this odd and foul smells that were populating the city of London. And this tour culminates in, I won't spoil it, but I'll tell you, it culminates in a location that is tremendously important in the life of one of the most famous, in fact I would say the most famous author to come out of the UK, in the person of Charles Dickens. And so it's a fascinating tour, and this all started because Karen's friend is an author. To be clear, he's not a tour guide. Like, this is not something he was doing before, but he's so steeped in that era that Karen was like, I think this would be fun if you brought this era to life, since you know it so well, with our clients. Would you be willing to do it? He tried the first time, second time, third time, and now it's something that we offer our clients when they visit London. And so the common theme here is it starts with people. It starts with looking at the people who are not tour guides, not in the tourism industry at all, but who are open to sharing their expertise and their lives with our travelers. And when you do that, you do it well. Again, money wise, you're not breaking the bank. It's generating symbolic but useful income to the people who are volunteering their time to do this, and more importantly, it's creating human connections. And so I'm proud to say that across all of our destinations, we've been able to do this. And I could go on and on with examples, but I think you get the point of using the personal connections of our teams to uncover moments where our travelers are meeting with locals and having a conversation that is not anchored in tourism, but anchored in something else.
Is this something that all of your DMCs and travel collection are aiming to kind of have as part of their portfolio? Or do you
Yeah.
feel like these are hard to create because they are so reliant upon connections that it's like, well, they exist where they exist, but we can't say that like it's everywhere in every destination. You know what I mean?
I know what you mean, but no, I think if you're acting in good faith, there's no reason why we can't come up with more examples of the kinds of thing I told you about, right? So to be clear, people get sick, they take vacations, right? So because we're so reliant on individuals, they may not be possible all the time. But the concept of
Yeah.
thinking through your network and thinking through things you can offer people that are a little bit different, that holds true anywhere. And so, yeah, the answer to your question is, in every market we're in, we have examples like the ones that I just gave you, and they resonate very, very well with our travelers.
What's the best way? I mean, this feels like a stupid question, but here we go. What's the best way to communicate with the DMC in a way that's like, we are looking for the unique. We are looking for, like, of course, here's what the client is interested in, because I know that that is also important.
Yeah,
Um, but we're not looking to break the bank. Like, we still have a budget to work within. And I think that what I'm always considering is like, you can have a super cool experience, but then what's the value on like what's being charged for that experience? So to give you some perspective, there's sometimes where I see something is included in a proposal, and when there is a breakdown provided or when I know the cost of it, I'll be like, oh my God, that's it. And be like, get it in there. I'm not even going to mention it, right, to the clients. But then other times it's like, wow, this does sound really cool. This does sound really unique. This is really special, but like it's $3,000
yeah,
for a morning kind of situation.
yeah.
I know the clients would love it, but I don't think
They're
they would
willing
love
to
it if
spend
they knew
that.
the
Yeah,
cost of
yeah,
it.
yeah,
And so I'm always kind of like, and it's not, whenever I have a feeling that something is expensive, it is never a reflection of the DMC charging too much. I think the experience is cost what the experience is cost. It's
yeah,
always a question of like, is this a special enough experience that it's going to provide value in the client's eyes and they're
yeah,
going to be happy to spend that money?
yeah,
And for every single client, that answer is different. So
yeah.
what's the best way to kind of communicate to a DMC that's like they're really interested in unique and kind of special opportunities, and also this is the budget. So like kind of working our magic within these
Yeah, it's to
parameters.
do what you just said. I think too often we get the first part without the second, and that's where DMCs can go off the rails, right? If you just tell us they're interested in unique, things that are just unusual, and you don't give us any indication of budget, let me give you, a straight answer. What you should do in this case is the first part of the sentence stays the same, and but I would just add a second part, which is important, which is to say, these clients are adventurous and want something. Anytime they go somewhere, they really love to see things that are unexpected, and on average, they're willing to spend between $200 and $500 per person on such experiences. That's binding the request, right, with very clear bounds of like, okay, yes, they want this, but here's a ballpark of what they're willing to spend per
Yep.
experience per person. That way, yeah, we can get creative, but we also aren't going crazy. I'll give you a great example. I took a bunch of my friends to Madrid 2 weekends ago, and we just had a fun weekend, with a bunch of friends. And one of the experiences that our team in Spain suggested sounded amazing to me, but I knew that it wasn't going to be a good fit. And the experience was a private after hours access to the museum where the Guernica is hung. Guernica is Picasso's most famous work. It's a painting depicting warfare. If you just Google Picasso most famous painting, it'll show up. And the idea of having that such an iconic piece of art just to ourselves, after hours, like I personally was salivating at the thought of that. I mean, how cool is this? But
Yeah.
that would have been, I think it was like 4 or 5K, right? To your point, for like a 2 hour after hours access thing. And I was like, no, I don't. I mean, I love the idea, but I know it's not going to work. My friends aren't going to value that to the same
Right.
extent that I will. So you have to
Right.
make these judgment calls, and that's where again having a clear sense of budget can help orient what's possible from what's not.
Yeah. Isham, I feel like we could talk for days. So thank you for your willingness just to kind of come on and answer some unexpected. I hope you don't feel like I put you in a difficult spot, but I think that knowing from a DMC perspective how you think through some of these details and how we can better partner, and just your side of the story, I think is so interesting to hear. And I'm sure that sometime soon we'll come up with some more topics to have you on again.
I'll be happy to come back. Thank you for the opportunity, and to everyone listening, I look forward to working with you all. Just give us a shout. Thank you.
Amazing. Thanks, Isham.